All right, welcome back. So in today's lesson, we're going to cover three key in-game principles. So if you're a beginner, you're going to want to watch this and make sure that you apply this to your games. So the three key principles we're going to go over are king centralization, trading down pieces properly, and then piece activity. So let's crack into it. King centralization, that's the first one. That's the most important. So king safety is a massive principle in the opening and middle game. You want to get your king to safety as quickly as possible. But in the end game, it's the opposite. Of course, you got to watch out for your king and his safety, but you want to centralize your king as quickly as you can and keep that king centralized. Because if your king starts heading towards the edges while your opponent's king is in the center, you're in store for some trouble. So just to illustrate that, like always, we're going to go over some examples. This is a dead drawn position. Black's rook is cutting off the white king. But if black decides here to get fancy and start trading rooks, his king just ends up in the corner and white's king is in the center. And, you know, white's just going to easily win this game. As simplistic of an example as that is, if we just go back a few moves, look how quickly the game changed when black traded pieces and then ended up with a king in the corner. White's king dominates the center and dominates the game. So example number 2, another rook endgame. This is a win for white because white's pieces are just going to coordinate and that pawn is going to become a queen. However, if black's king was on a8 instead, that's a different story, because that way the king would be in the action and centralized, not from a center of the board perspective, but centralized for the action. On h8, the king's doing nothing, and it's just a matter of time before white promotes that pawn, or black has to sacrifice the rook for the pawn, and then white wins an easy endgame. So one more example, just to show how important it is to centralize the king or get the king in an active position. And this actually ties into principle 3, piece activity. Here, black's rook is very passive. It's just defending that c5 pawn. And the king on h7 is going to take a few moves to get into any sort of action. That's if white moves the rook away from the d file and lets the king across to begin with. So if this was white to play, it's not necessarily a win off the bat. White has some work to do, but white's just going to go on the offensive. This is pretty much white is just going to come into the position, probably win. You know, if we go check here and then come back. Something like this. It's just a matter of time before white gobbles up all these pawns and ends up 4 pawns ahead. That's how quickly the game can change. That would have been a lot different if that king was on b6 or b7. Let's say b7 to start with. It would be a whole different ball game. The black king would be in the center of the action, which is happening on the queen side. But here, he's just way too far from the action. So principle number 2, this is absolutely key. So if I was to summarize it, it is if you are behind in material, you want to trade your pawns, not your pieces, as it says there. So that maximizes your drawing chances. And take this in, read it as many times as you need to take it in. And if you are ahead in material, you want to trade pieces, not pawns. And that maximizes your winning chances. The best way I can illustrate this is with a dynamic board here. This is just king, king, and pawn. This is a easy win for white. White's just going to push that pawn to d8, queen, and win the game. But what happens, who does it favor if there's a pair of knights on the board? It favors black, because black is going to sacrifice that knight for the pawn at some point and end up in a drawn position. What if we had rooks instead. Let's just put that rook here. Well, this might be a drawn position, but it's still going to favor white being pawn up. Now let's just add, let's add bishops. Let's add another set of knights. Let's add, you know what, just for good measure, another set of knights. Who's winning here now? Well, it's really hard to tell, right? But it's pretty equal. White has that extra pawn. He's got the material advantage, but you could kind of see when it was just the pawn, it was very easy for white to win. When there's a whole bunch of pieces, it's very hard for white to win. What would white want in this position in order to win? White would want there to be more pawns. So let's just put some pawns on the board. This is a crazy position, but we're just illustrating the point. So in this type of a position, let's say this is a early endgame, late middle game. White is a pawn up, the same pawn on d3. You could kind of see what white wants to do. White wants to trade all the pieces and just be left with pawns, right? Read that again. If you're ahead in material, trade pieces, not pawns. Because as soon as white trades, let's say these 3 pawns disappear and these 3 pawns disappear, black at any point during the game can end up sacrificing that knight. And it's still going to be quite hard because white has a knight advantage, but it's going to be really hard to actually come up with meaningful checkmate chances here. So white wants to maintain the pawns on the board and trade pieces. So honestly, that principle is just as it's written there. Memorize it to heart, take it to heart, take it into your games. If you're behind in material, trade pawns. That maximizes your drawing chances. And if you're ahead of material, trade pieces, because then you're left with a pawn advantage, and that's how you maximize your winning chances. Now, last but not least, piece activity. So let's go with this example. As we saw, actually, let's come back to this example. As we saw in this example, quite a few pieces left on the board still, but it's very much an endgame. White has more active pieces. The rook controls that file, blocks the king from ever coming onto the queen side, which is, the action is happening on this quadrant, but the black king is blocked off. That rook is passively defending the c5 pawn. If that rook was on e3, for instance, that would be another story. Then black has chances on the king side, but he can't go here, he can't go here. And since it's white to move, white's going to go king b5. If it was black to move, he would have to go rook to b6 in order. Let's just say white plays something like that, something silly. Now it's a draw because the king is now trapped on that a file. So white here recognizes that, hey, look, I can't get my king trapped. Goes to b5 and now has an active king and an active rook, whereas black has a passive rook and a passive king. So this example is just one to show you how even when it comes to chasing pawns and material, it's still better sometimes you got to evaluate the position, of course, but it's sometimes better to give up material than end up passive. So let's just say here it's equal material. White has this queenside pawn majority, so he wants to go b4 with the plan of b5, creating a passed pawn. And black says, you know what? I'm going to attack this pawn. And the only way white can defend it is by going rook to h1. But what that does is that leaves white in a bit of a passive position, because then he's just got no active chances. He's just defending his own position, his own h3 pawn. Instead, white can sacrifice that pawn by going king d4, right? Centralizing the king. The king's threatening to come in here. Or maybe even the pawn's going to come here and stop the king from easily coming into the position, the black king. Now, if black takes on h3 and starts getting hungry for pawns, well, suddenly white just says, hey, look, like, I'm winning time here. Now the king goes to f8. We've got pawn to c6. king to e7, king c5. The rook comes in. Looks like an active rook, right? It looks pretty active. But it's not, because check. And again, black can't come here because of checkmate. So black is forced to move aside. And then again, remember activity. That king is now, it's in a decent position. It's on e7. It would have been a lot worse if it was on h7, but it's still blocked off, right? That rook on d1 is blocking it. And white has a cute little trick here. Rook to d4. Now, if black plays something like rook c1, white just plays rook d8, and there's nothing you can do to stop white from making a queen. My computer's lagging a bit, excuse me. But even if black takes this, white makes a queen. So there's nothing black can do. Black went around with his rook, gobbled up the h3 pawn, but forgot to get his king to the center, and when white just recognized pretty quickly that, hey, I'm actually better off centralizing my king and going for piece activity than playing passively. So similar to a middle game, but in an end game, it can win you the game within sort of 5 to 10 moves pretty quickly, because the activity you get from the end game usually leads to winning material or making a queen, depending on the position, of course. But that's why you've just got to watch out not to get hungry for pawns. Get hungry for activity, even if it means sacrificing a pawn. So there you have it, the 3 most important key endgame principles. And if you're a beginner, I hope you took something out of this. Subscribe. You'll see some more videos like this coming through, or check out my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.